Let's go over the sections of the spine and how to identify the vertebrae from the different regions. Let's start off at the top with your cervical spine. So up here you have 7 cervical vertebrae, and you have this curve here. The curve in your cervical spine is called your lordotic curve. It's a lordotic curve. Coming down here, your thoracic spine. So this curve in the spine here is known as a kyphotic curve. And then down here in your lumbar spine, you have 5 lumbar vertebrae. This is a lordotic curve again. And down here on the sacrum, you have a curve here. Again, that would be a kyphotic curve, including your coccyx down there as well. So how do you remember how many vertebrae are in each section of the spine? So the easiest way to do this, there's a couple different mnemonics, but the one I'm going to teach you is the most complete. It's the best one out there. So for the first one, you're gonna, for cervical spine, for remembering how many vertebrae are in the cervical spine, you are going to eat cereal at 7 a.m. So there must be 7 cervical vertebrae. For your thoracic vertebrae, for remembering that there are 12 thoracic vertebrae, you can think of, you're going to have tacos at 12, so there must be 12 thoracic vertebrae. And for your lumbar spine, for those lumbar vertebrae, you are going to have lasagna at 5 p.m. So lasagna at 5, there are 5 lumbar vertebrae. So again, cereal at 7, tacos at 12, and lasagna at 5. So let's talk more about the cervical spine. So a typical cervical vertebrae is going to have a small body. It's going to have a bifid spinous process, as you can see right here. So that just means that there's 2 points to that spinous process. Instead of just having 1 point here, it's going to have 2 points here. It's going to have a transverse foramen. Right here, we can see this hole right here. It's going to have those transverse processes with that transverse foramen. So this is the biggest identifying factor here, is that transverse foramen. Cervical vertebrae are going to have that transverse foramen. If you see a transverse foramen, a hole on the side of the vertebrae, that is indicating that it is a cervical vertebrae. This right here, this is your vertebral foramen, but this is your transverse foramen. So all your vertebrae are going to have that vertebral foramen, but only cervical spine vertebrae are going to have that transverse foramen. The body of the cervical vertebrae is going to be smaller, which makes sense because it's farther, it's up more on the top of the spine, and it doesn't, as we go throughout the body, we have to support, as we go further down the spine, we have to support more weight. So it makes sense that the body is smaller in the cervical spine than it is going to be in the thoracic, and then definitely what it's going to be in the lumbar. So again, if you see that transverse foramen, you are looking at a cervical vertebrae. So you also have C1 and C2. So here's C1 and here's C2. C2 is going to have this this dens. It's called the dens, or the odontoid process, and that is sticking up like this. So that allows C1 and C2 to articulate together. A lot of rotation happening at that joint. But the difference, to identify C2, it kind of looks like a saddle horn, like a horn on a saddle. If you ever, if you're a horseback rider, you've seen that horn on the saddle. So that to me looks like that. And then C1 just goes right on top of that. And C1 just looks weird. It's totally different than the other cervical vertebrae. So that's how I would identify it. So a typical thoracic vertebrae, let's talk about a typical thoracic vertebrae now. So a typical thoracic vertebrae is distinguished by the spinous process, which is going to be long and point downward. So you can take a look at this. Here is that large, very long spinous process, and it is definitely pointing downwards. Another few other things you'll notice is some of the facets. The transverse process has an articular facet for the tubercle of the rib, because remember, the ribs are going to attach. So it's going to attach here and then on that articular facet right here. So the ribs are going to be attaching here. So that is a unique feature of the thoracic spine, is the rib attachment there. There's a few other ways you can tell the difference. The main one, the spinous process looking down, and then also the easiest way, you kind of just look at it, look at the thoracic vertebrae, and you may realize that it looks kind of like a giraffe. You know, that long nose pointing down like that. These superior articular processes go up like this. It kind of looks like the ears, and then you have some other features. Well, not the ears, these horns on the giraffe. I I don't know what those, I think they're horns. And then these would be the ears, so those transverse processes there. So now let's talk about the lumbar vertebrae. So here you can see we're in the lumbar spine going down here. And of course, a great identifying factor, it's going to have a huge body because it has to support all the rest of the spine going up here. Cervical spine, we had those smaller bodies, and we went into the thoracic spine, and you could see the bodies were getting bigger. And now we're at the lumbar spine where we have these big, massive bodies. Which makes sense because you have to support the rest of the spine, the rest of the body from that segment up. Another distinguishable factor here is the spinous process. These are they're kind of short, but they're kind of big and thick. So that's another way you can tell the difference. And if you want to simplify it even more, I just take a look and you look at these vertebrae, and I think they look kind of like a moose because this could be that spinous process here, the kind of a short and very thick spinous process.